What we know that electricity market in Indonesia is very monopolistic, and it's only owned by the market is only owned by that electricity company, the government basically. Unfortunately, when we talk about government, it's very easy for people with a lot of money to capture the state, right, and to manipulate policy concessions for their benefit.
Welcome to the Student Talk series, a podcast where UIII students discuss various stories about students' life that the general public may not be familiar with.
Dari awal masuk aja udah ditanya, kamu interest di bidang apa, gitu ya.
There are still many people who don't even care about their healthy lifestyle.
All hilarious, engaging and heartbreaking stories will be told lightly and in casual way. Enjoy the show!
Okay, thank you so much. I look forward to reading your paper because it's very interesting. I would like to know what are some of the insights, as you mentioned, to read and understand, the similarities between Indonesia and Turkey in terms of democracy. Well, moving on, I would like to also ask you about your publications. It's very tedious as a student, as an MA student, to actually be doing your assignments, going to class, and then at the same time, having the time to write and publish, which is very, very important, and it's very, very good as an MA student. You co-authored a book on the political economy of rooftop solar in Indonesia. Why is Indonesia's clean energy so complex? Like, it seems so complex. What is your own insights about Indonesia's clean energy transition?
Yeah. This is the book. Okay. Yeah, this is the book. Sure. I co-authored a book chapter in this book. The Yusuf Kala Library also had a session book forum where we talk about this book, right? When we discuss this book inside out. But of course, I would, recommend basically all the viewers to, go check this out. Okay. However, I'm really sorry, Wally. It's only written in Indonesia.
Oh,
it's only written
maybe
in
you should
Indonesia,
help me with the translation.
I will provide the translation for you, just for my book chapter, right? Yeah. I'm just gonna forward it to you. Your main question is why clean energy transition in Indonesia is so complex, and perhaps it's also very challenging, right? And I think that's a very important question. That's one, that is essentially the question that me and my colleague tried to answer. If we, first of all, we need to clarify what energy transitions mean, right? So basically, you want to use other sources of energy. For instance, when we cook, like 100 years ago, we have to collect woods from the forest, right? And we burn the woods and then we cook. Now, we don't use that, right? Now, I think it was like 2 or 3 decades ago, most or a large number of Indonesians still did that, right? They collect woods from nearby area and then they use that for cooking. And then 2 decades ago, Indonesian government launched an initiative to basically transition to LPG, or liquefied petroleum gas. And so we use cooking stove now, right? And then we use cooking gas to basically cooking. And that was, I argued, that was a very successful energy transition. But in this book, we don't deal with that. We're dealing with another subset of energy transition, which is electricity generation. Electricity generation is a very complex issue, at least in Indonesia. And electricity generation has contributed to the production of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2 emissions, right? And as we already know, that's just not good for the environment. It's not good for us as well, right? And one of the source of energy generation for that is actually coal, because Indonesia, specifically in Kalimantan Island, there are so many mining coals, which owned by nation's oligarch, right? And the national electricity company had to use that coal to for their power plant, right, to generate electricity for basically the whole Indonesia, electricity demand in the whole Indonesia. One thing that we need to understand about the arrangement of electricity distribution in Indonesia is you only have one player. So the market for electricity in Indonesia is very monopolistic. Whether it's good or bad, it's it's outside my discussion. But what we know that electricity market in Indonesia is very monopolistic, and it's only owned by the market is only owned by that electricity company, the government basically, right? Yeah. And unfortunately, when we talk about government, it's very easy for people with a lot of money to capture the state, right? And to manipulate policy concessions for their benefit, right? Now, in this case of electricity generation, the electricity company has many pressures from so many ministries. The Ministry of Environment pressured the company to transition, right? On the other hand, the Ministry of Trade and the Ministry of Energy pressured the company to make sure that they can provide electricity to every household in Indonesia, right? So that means, and then the Ministry of Finance pressured the company to make some profits, sure. which is hard, man. I mean, if you're the director of the company, you have a headache every single day, right? Because a lot of people in Indonesia, I think 10% of people in Indonesia still live under poverty, but yet they also require electricity to get out from that poverty. And so the government subsidizes electricity generation and electricity distribution for those level or those echelons of people, basically poor people in Indonesia are being subsidized. So what happened if that's the case, right? The consequence is the company needs to have stable source of electricity generation, and one stable source is coal, right? That's the only viable option. It's not the only viable option now, but at least a decade or 2 decades ago, coal is a stable source of electricity generation. It's cheap, it's easy to manage, it's easy to access, right? And if you have some surpluses, you can sell the coal to the global market, right? And now we have that. Now, if you do that for basically 2 decades, right? Our electricity generation now is really dependent on coal. If you do that, you kind of lock in, right, to this kind of electricity generation mode.
Yeah, I think you already answered the question. Looking at it, I was also opportune to attend Indonesia's net zero conference.
Net zero conference, yes.
So while I was attending the conference, I had like, Indonesia's target by 2050, to actually, have net zero. So I think, Indonesia's case is going to be very, very complex for Indonesia to transition to renewable energy, because if you're looking at it in the Just Energy Transition project, the reason why the project didn't succeed in Indonesia is because, as you mentioned, the monopolized market of electricity, which is PLN, which
PLN
contributes the production and distribution of energy within the country. So I think that discourages the private sector from taking part, in the energy distribution, like in production of renewable energy, to compete with PLN. And then I think the other thing also you mentioned, subsidy also is very, very key. Indonesia's electricity is subsidized. It is very cheap. So what it means is, if the country should transition to renewable energy, there's a risk of it being very expensive. If also the private sector also venture into it, there's also a risk of it becoming very expensive. And I think the government don't want to, do that, because it's already, very, very cheap. So it's going to be a political backlash if energy prices increases, things like that, because people are already used to the subsidies in energy production and distribution and things like that. So I think two insights I would take from you is the subsidies, and then also the monopoly of energy, which is PLN, which controls everything in terms of energy production, distribution to the entire state. So that discourage the private sector from into renewable energy and things like that. So I think it's going to be very, very
I think so.
complex for Indonesia to transition, though the country has the potentials to do so, but it's going to be very, very, difficult. So what we hope that, Indonesia will also, transition to renewable energy, because looking at it in terms of emissions within Southeast Asia, it is among the countries that emit more. And at the same time, they don't only produce coal, but they also export to other countries. So that makes Indonesia one of the countries that will really need to transition to renewable energy. So thank you so much.
I think so, yeah,
for that. And I think we can now move on to, what role do you see Indonesia playing, in terms of, renewable energy transition? Like, what is the role Indonesia is playing? Because we understand that today there is so much of geopolitical tensions in terms of renewable energy transition and climate change issues, like China, US, in terms of who will compensate in terms of climate finance and things like that. So what do you think Indonesia's role is currently, like in terms of geopolitical issues? What are they doing in terms of energy transition at the global level, the advocacies and things like that?
Yeah, very specific on the issue of energy transition, right? Again, I'm not the right, I don't think I'm the right person to talk about this. But my take for that question would be very disappointing for policymakers in Indonesia. My main point is this. We have a huge potential, right, in energy transition, in realizing our potential in renewable energy. The problem is we do not assume that role, right? And we should start to taking that leading role in, energy transition. What are the main ingredients of energy transition? You have, if it's solar panel, you need constant sun exposures. We have it, right? If it's hydropower, you need basically high volumes of maybe rivers or dams, right? We have it. If it's wind, we have some places where we can have wind turbines. If it's geothermal, we also have some sites where they can produce geothermal. Is it technology? My book said that, book chapter that I wrote said that the price for solar rooftop, right, and electricity generation from solar is just getting cheaper and cheaper every year, right? So technology adoption with that price, I don't think is an issue, right? The role that we are having currently is an example of how a country undervalue its potential, right? Which is a very upsetting, upsetting diagnosis for many policymakers. But I have to say the blunt truth.
You are insinuating that Indonesia has the resources, but it is not utilizing it in the area of energy transition.
We have everything what it takes to transition, but we don't do it.
Okay.
And we don't do it fast enough, right? We have to do that fast enough. Let me give you one example from my book, right? Well, if you are an average Indonesian and you want to put solar panel on your rooftop, right? You can't just do it right away. You can't just buy a solar panel and then you renovate electricity circuits in your home. You also have to come to PLN, electricity company, and you have to ask permissions to PLN that, look, I want to buy a solar rooftop, and so basically I don't really need electricity from you, right? And if that's the case, the PLN won't do it because the PLN also have the interest to sell electricity, right? That they have bought from coal miners, right? And that's a bureaucratic hurdles, right? We have state level regulations for having solar panel rooftop. It was issued by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. But the problem is that regulation changes twice every year. Now, if you have state level regulations that changes twice every year or once every year, you won't have any certainty, right? Businessman, layman person cannot work with uncertainty, right? And so we have we should have a certain regulation. We need certain regulations to really transition, right? Otherwise, we're just gonna, stay in our place.